Welcome to Photoshop WoW 6.3 Back to the Future. Today we're going to talk a little bit about color theory. We're going to talk about textures. We're going to talk about how to capture, create, design, use, automate, overlay, create the ultimate background utilizing textures. Then we're going to also talk about how to add graphics to that textured background, automate the whole process, and finish up with some ultimate combinations. Kind of a quick review of the last 2 weeks. This is part 3 of a 6-part series. Week 1 was selection logic, building your album set, pulling your images into groups that we would apply to album layouts and individual pages so that your album set is built and ready to go into Photoshop. We're really just kind of going through the thought process of building the album long before we launch it into Photoshop. Week 2, custom album layouts. We talked about building presets in Photoshop, guides. We built a drop zone action. This was our action that automatically pulled our images into our spread. And then we talked about pre-cropping images for a pre-design before pulling them into the spread so that we wouldn't have to do a whole lot of free transforming and adjusting once the images were in the album layout itself. We finished off with a little bit of discussion about how to build a mental data bank of design ideas by just studying things you've done in the past and what other photographers have done. Diving right in here, we're going to start talking about a little bit of color theory. With album design and photography, color theory is the basis of one of the elements that we use with design and photography. This first slide shows a little bit of the warm colors. Now what I have placed here in the middle is a color wheel. I've grayed out the colors that don't really apply to this image, but what I'm trying to show here is that warm colors jump off the screen. They tend to surround images around them. So for example, the image on the left, yes, it's a slightly warm toned black and white, and that helps it merge with that red background. If it was a pure black and white, the red background would kind of wrap around it just a little bit. Here is a cool tone background. Cool tones tend to recede, fall back, and so utilizing that to help an image that naturally would fall back on its own helps it to stand on top of the page. If I was to put this this cool blue image on top of the previous layout with the red background, that red background would really just wrap around it. So keeping in conjunction with the imagery that's on top of the background with the colors helps the images pop. Using a complementary color scheme here to kind of give it a little push-pull, a little fight. Complementary colors tend to fight each other, create some vibrance, and so I like the way this album layout kind of came out with, you know, the red on the right and the green, and you can see on the color wheel how they're across from each other. And I did the exact same thing on my album layout. It just kind of creates a little tension, a little fight. And then you have analogous colors. These are colors found side by side on the color wheel. And here's a couple different hues and saturations of yellow greens, yellows, orange yellows, or what we would known as foliage colors and browns, stuff you find in nature. And this is analogous color schemes, and this is 3 colors side by side on the color wheel. Okay, now we're going to jump back into Bridge here. So I'm just going to close these out. And we're going to start talking about how to capture textures. Before I start capturing a texture, I try to think of the base elements of how I like to design textures. Because what I'm going to do is we're going to take basic elements of these textures, we're going to mix them together to make what I call a designer texture. For me, the base element of a good designer texture is a flat lit, low contrast element. Concrete, asphalt, stained metals all create great base textures. So for example, here's a construction zone not far from the studio. Drove over there with my G9 camera, took pictures of the painted walls, looked for the variance in where when they painted, where the roller might have been a little heavy with paint versus a little light with paint. Here out in the middle of that construction zone, there's a pile of broken up concrete. I just kind of went around and grabbed a couple images of where the tool marks might have scratched the concrete as it was being broken up. And then just another little wall. As I was driving down the street, I spotted this wall and grabbed a handful of textures off of the wall. These are just base textures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open one of these base textures, and I'm going to start preparing this for a designer texture. First thing I might do is go ahead and clone and stamp out that corner just so that that leaf is out of there. And then I'm going to build a dodge and burn layer. The way I build my dodge and burn layer is I make a new layer from the layers palette, the little layer icon in the bottom right, and then I go to blending modes, soft light. So this is just a blank layer blended with the blending mode of soft light. And with my paintbrush, just a regular paintbrush, and a lower opacity, I'm going to be at 30% today, I'm just going to paint with black to burn in the edges. I like to vignette my textures a little bit because it helps put a little vignetting around the background of my designs. Okay, so you can see I've just added in, there's a little bit of natural vignetting on the top from the image. That would be from the tree overhanging when I took the picture. And that would be a vignetted texture. And so now what I'm going to do is I want to go in, I want to add a graphic element to kind of break up the texture a little bit, because that's just a base texture. To me, I want to use what I like to call designer textures. And to give you an example, my designer textures, they're usually layers of elements, 2 and 3 deep, giving different graphic effects mixed in with natural textures. Some of them seem very simple, like this one. It's ironwork, but I've added in water droplets. I've added in scratches. This is some stained concrete with some pink with a graphic, wooden floor with scratches, maybe a little few water droplets just to give it some effects. Now, raw artwork is created in a couple ways. You can go photograph scrolls in ironwork and woodwork that you can find almost anywhere. If you're familiar with Illustrator, you can draw your own. I like to draw a lot of mine in Adobe Illustrator. If you're not very Illustrator savvy and you just want to go grab some, there's lots of places on the internet that you can go purchase vector artwork. Your stock websites, they sell Illustrator files or vector artwork. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab this piece of vector artwork, and this is just some scratches that I've created, and I'm going to drag them into Photoshop. The nice thing about vector artwork is you can change the color space, you can set the resolution, you can set the size, and no matter what, it's always going to be sharp and crisp. With textures and with scrolls, I like them to start off big so that I can always downsample them into album layouts instead of upsize them into album layouts. Okay, so here's a bed of scratches that I'm just going to skew in here. Now this isn't scrolls or anything, so I'm not worried about whether I skew it or not. I am going to desaturate it. Image, adjustments, desaturate. Command-Shift-U on the Mac, Control-Shift-U on the PC. And then I'm going to blend this with a soft light. You'll see that I like soft light a lot. And this just puts some cracks in here that I really like the cracks. I might try inverting the colors, which would be image adjustments, invert, or Command-I, Control-I on the PC to see if I like them in a dark color. Maybe lower the opacity. I do like the dark color. And at this point, this designer texture would probably be complete, because what I've done is I started with my base background layer. I dodged and burned it, which gave me a little bit of that vignetting hotspot center effect. And then I added some scratches and some texture to it. So I'm going to flatten this out, and then I'm going to save it as a texture. And you can name them however you want. I already have one in there named that, but I'll go ahead and replace it. I actually leave my textures as JPEGs. Baseline standard 12. Close that out. Let's go in here to my captured textures, and at the bottom here you can now see my designer texture. So Here's the base texture that I started with, and then when I jump to the next one, you can see the designer texture that I've finished up with. Okay, now that I've created my designer texture, I'm ready to dive in, and let's apply this texture to an album layout. So here's an album layout that we built in week 1 and started off again in week 2. And so the way I start my textures off, I like to start them by selecting my background layer in Photoshop in the Layers palette. And then I go down to Adjustment Layers. It's the half black and white cookie at the bottom of the Layers palette. When you select that, you get this selection of adjustments, and I like to use solid color. And then you get a color picker. And I can pick the color from anywhere in the image. Now, choosing from the image, in my opinion, is the best way to complement the color. So, for example, you can see here with the bright pink, you can see how it kind of takes over the images. You can really see it coming through the images. If I choose the blue, you can see how the images fall right into it, and the blue just kind of falls back, and the black really just sinks in. I'm going to grab the pink because it's really complementing the image on the left, and that starts me off with a base color. Okay, I'm going to flip over to where I can click back to Bridge, Captured Textures. I'm going to bring in a texture here, and at this point I'm simply going to drag and drop that texture onto my album layout. I can close the texture out. I don't need it any longer. And so here you can see the texture is plenty big, so I'm just going to stretch it to fit because I want it to fit in my background area because of the vignetting that I created, and I want it to vignette back there. Then I'm going to simply just change the blending mode to soft light, and you can see it just adds a nice textured element back there that gives it a little soft vignette, and there's some texture, and I can even lower the opacity down if I think it's too much. And that's how we apply a texture to a background. Let's do one more. So I'm going to grab this album right here, and let's go to another designer texture, and we're just going to open up this simple texture here. Let's start by selecting the background, go to the adjustment layers, add a solid color. I'm going to choose from within the album layout, so it's all going to be fairly gray since it is a gray black and white image. Now I'm going to drag the texture onto it. We can close that out, and then I'm going to resize this to fit. If we transform that in, change the blending mode to soft light. Now, a big difference between the first one we did and the second one we did. The first one we did is a fairly neutral color. That concrete was fairly gray. There wasn't a whole lot of tone to the texture itself. This texture is a brownish, yellowy texture. And so when we blend it in, the color of the texture falls with it. Sometimes it'll help our layout. Sometimes it'll hinder the color that we've chosen. The fastest way just to knock out that color, let's bring it back here so you can see it, is to Image, Adjust, Desaturate, or Command-Shift-U, Control-Shift-U on the PC. I'm just going to desaturate that texture. Now when I blend it in, you can see that I have no color change to the background. It's just a density adjustment with the texture, which works really nicely since I spent some time selecting a very specific background color from within the album layout. Okay, so let's jump to a third way that we can utilize a texture. I'm going to bring up in this green texture, which will definitely give us a really strong color shift. Pop open an album layout here. And here's an album layout with quite a few different colors going on. So I'm going to grab my background, add a solid color, and you can see that quite a few colors giving quite a few different feels and effects to the overall layout, because we've got this neutral going on here with the blue coming off the blue jeans, and then we have in this primary image on the right, you've got the teal in the background, the blue from the blue jeans, and then everything else is fairly neutral, and then 3 neutral images. So I'm going to go fairly neutral because as I'm thinking my way through this, I hear the word neutral in my head over and over and over. So instead of fighting the neutral color with a blue, I'm going to complement the neutral colors throughout and let the blues and the teals kind of become the dominant. Now, when I add this texture in on the background, close that out, I'm just going to free transform this around. If you hold down Shift while rotating, it rotates on the 45s. And then I'm going to blend this. And you can see now that brings some of that teal green back into my image, which I like a little bit of it, but it's a little bit too much. So here's what I'm going to do. Instead of using an adjustment layer, I'm actually going to go to Image, Adjust, Hue, Saturation, or Command U, Control U on the PC. And then I'm going to colorize this texture. And by colorizing it, then I can come through and I can pick what color I want that background texture to be. And I love the blue-green effect here. And I can even change the saturation to just get a little bit of the blue-green coming in the highlight center, and then it's fading off into that neutral edge. And so a third way that you can adjust a texture is by colorizing it in the hue and saturation. And so you can overlay with the exact color of the texture, which would be this way right here. You see we have the green, and we can blend it with soft light, and that's using the natural color of the texture. We can desaturate, Command Shift U, Control Shift U on the PC, and you can see that just desaturates the texture, giving the texture the same feel as the original background color that you chose, just changing the density. Or we can colorize the texture and adjust the hue and saturation to change the overall color of the texture and blending it in basically from a different color. So 3 different ways you can utilize your designer textures to get the desired effect that you're looking for. Close that out, jump back here. Okay, so now that I've showed you the 3 ways I like to apply textures, let me show you how I like to automate the process. And we're going to start off with this layout that we've created already. I'm going to go ahead and select my background color. I don't want to automate that because that's going to be custom every time. But now, from this point on, I really want to make this process of dropping a texture into my album layout as fast as possible. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and write me an action. So we're going to go ahead, and I like to call it romance. So I've built myself here a album set, or an action set, excuse me, that auto romance, and this is going to automatically apply our textures. Now I just threw the ones that I created last week away so y'all can see how I create them. Now again, like last week, the way you create a set is utilizing the set create new set button here, which looks like a little folder in the bottom of the actions palette. To create a new action, you go over to the right one. It looks just like the new layer icon, but it's in the action palette, and it's create new action. Title this Romance Drop ND. ND to me means neutral density. I'm going to desaturate this texture so that it drops all the color. 9 out of 10 times that's what I do for my background layouts because I do spend the time selecting the specific color I would like. Okay, so now it's in record mode. So we're going to record everything we're going to do. The first thing I'm going to do is insert a menu item. I'm going to go ahead and insert a file open, and that way it prompts me to open my texture. Now for writing this action, at this point I'm going to stop the action so that I can open a texture and it's not going to record the opening of the texture. This is just for writing it. Then I press record one more time, and now it's going to feel a lot like the drop zone action. Select all, so select all, or Command A, copy, Command C, Control C on the PC. I'm going to deselect, Command D or Control D on the PC. Close it, Command W, Control W on the PC. Paste, Command V. And then I'm going to Control V on the PC, excuse me. And then I'm going to desaturate this texture because this is a neutral density. And that's going to be Command Shift U or Control Shift U on the PC. Change the blending mode to soft light. That blends the texture in. And then I'm going to insert one more menu item. I want it to go ahead and select my free transform and put my free transform handles around the texture so that when I play the action, it automatically has that set up. So all I have to do is free transform it and press enter. And let's test this. Let's throw this texture away. Press play. So let's design our texture. Let's grab the same one we've been using. Press open. It's going to copy, paste it in there, desaturate it, free transform it, blend it. Now all I have to do is resize it, press enter, and my texture is in there. So now I want to add a graphic to this because I've already got my designer texture. It's got a lot of nice little things going on back there. I want to add a graphic. I can use this exact same action and apply the exact same action to some of my raw artwork. Let's add a cap scroll. And you can see it drops it right in there. I'm just going to rotate this around. And then I'm going to resize it. I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt, and it's going to resize from the center. And when I say from the center, it's going to resize from this point. So if I move this point, it's going to resize equally from that point. So I'm going to line it up left and right, or excuse me, top and bottom. Now you can see that this texture is not very bright. So I'm going to bring up my curves, Command M or Control M on the PC. I might darken this texture down just a little bit. Actually, I'm going to lighten it. There we go. And then I might space it out. And then all I have to do is duplicate it. Hold down Shift so it drags perfectly even over. And then I can spin that texture around. And I've just put a nice piece of artwork or some scroll work left and right of my image. And so that's a way that we can create not only a textured background, but we can add in scrolled artwork utilizing the same exact action. Now of course we can do a romance drop without the ND, and all you do is take out the desaturate step. Okay, so let's grab one more album layout here and show you what I call kind of a ultimate combination background. Okay, so working at kind of full speed here, I'm going to grab my background. I'm going to select a color. Now you can see it looks like I've got a vignette going on here, so I'm going to pull that vignette off. There we go. Alright, so now I can pick the color. Let's get kind of that neutral dark green. I like that. And we're just going to drop in a texture by playing the action. So let's use the texture that we built first. This is the one we built at the first part of the program. See, the action doesn't matter what you pick as your texture. Now, this texture probably should have been built just a touch bigger, but since it doesn't have really any graphic scrolls in it, it can be stretched. Okay, I'm going to lower the opacity of this because I just want a little bit of that. I'm going to add a second texture. Let's go to our designer textures, and I'm going to add in, let's add in this one just to kind of add a soft element to it. And this one's got a really nice light neutral center, which will give it some vignetting. And you can see where the first texture mixed with the second texture just gives it a really nice effect. And then now I want to add some graphics. I just want a big graphic scroll to just kind of float through here. So go to my raw artwork and let's just grab this big old scroll. And the nice thing is I can just kind of move it around a little bit, tap that in there. I might invert the scroll to get the opposite color, so the dark. Yeah, I like that dark. And then I'm just going to kind of fade it in there by lowering the opacity. So it's just really soft and subtle. And that's how I would finish off with an ultimate combination background. Couple layers, couple textures, couple pieces of artwork, some great places to find artwork. Again, you can find them all over online. Ironwork, woodwork, you can photograph it, crop into it, create your designer textures from your captured textures. Put them in a common place. Mine are in my My Documents folder, so that I can always just go straight to them really quickly. And the more you build, the more you use them, the faster you're going to be able to access them. Hope this helps, and look forward to seeing y'all next week with Photoshop WoW 6.4, Tetris 2. That's when we're going to go into taking our custom album layouts and converting them into templates, and then building a template catalog for yourself, and then how to automate templates for automatically dropping in images into previous layouts that you've already created. Have a great day.